Good afternoon and most welcome to 994 of the Heidegger series. It is a rather clement May Day today. We had some showers, but now it is an open sky once more. The weather system, or all weather systems, are chaotic system. It has a double meaning, so to speak. What does chaos mean? And that double meaning takes a whole lifetime to understand, Gleig said in his book Chaos. Well, I think maybe I can help out a little bit. We've studied chaos theory since, well, somewhere in Edvin, I think it's at least 600 episodes ago. And going back to things can often clarify, and I also understand now all the underlying information is still there. Nothing has disappeared. And this is how knowledge is working. It is constantly in the background and it gets us in different directions because they add to the complexities. So I mentioned the lecture of today will be how chaotic systems get strengthened. And how do we notice that when there's a change going on? Well, first you need a strange attractor. Strange attractor is sort of a magnet, and if you have a weather system, example with a tornado, the very middle is often called the eye of the storm. It is completely calm. I have a friend who experienced that. He's been traveling over the 7 seas for at least 30 years. To him it happened only once. They had been traveling in stormy weather in the South Atlantic for a couple of days. No stopping with the movement of the ship. And then it got even worse, and the ship was going there and here and there, and even some of the more accustomed crew got sick. And then all of a sudden, after 3-4 weeks of wind and weather, it was absolute calm and sunshine. The South Atlantic, that is very seldom calm. I think one day at a year was still. You can even see the shadow of the boat in the water, which is quite amazing in itself. That was the eye of the storm. And that is also the single strange attractor that builds up the storm. Everything is ordered in the eye. It's too much of an order, one could say even. So it could be hard to travel over this distance, but it was very short. And then they went into the tornado again. So this is how I usually perceive it, but nota bene, it is not always the case that the strange attractor is in the middle, because the middle is something we see from the outside. We don't know where the middle of a chaotic system is. It can only be understood once we are in it. But it's a good way to put it in a graphic form. Think about it as something in the middle. That's a good start, if any. The strange attractor needs to be calm, repetitive, uniform, same. It also needs to be directed. It needs some energy to it. I'm doing a strange attractor that takes 3 different levels, and I try to at least get in 3 different senses into the thing. That is sound, it is color, vision, it is shape. So those 3 things are in on the project. My plan is to gather even more aspects of reality to make it a complete reality. And this is actually the strange attractor of elitist gymnasts and so forth. But that takes a lot of training. I tried the other day and I can't do it really. Once I started to imagine touch, a bit of the shape disappeared, and that is very typical. Until you train this, it will not come easily to you. And if you think it's come easy to you, you are probably most mistaken, because we don't know our inner world. We need a chaotic system to read off ourselves. So there is a bit of a moment 22 to the whole thing, but it's not that bad. You can actually, by striving diligently in one direction, reach your goal. You need to trust the process to functioning. But what I have noticed is it's getting stronger now. And once you get over a certain hilly side, you come to a flat area. And I think I've passed one of those hilly sides, because now I can feel it all the time and I can give feedback to it. So that is one interesting thing. Once you discover it, you can give feedback to it, and then it becomes even stronger. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, the chaotic system gets stimulated by everything that is different. The more different, the better. Because, as I explained, it is two differences meeting, and the more difference in between them, something Susie Frobel called delta depth, the more you get out of it. So that is one of the reasons, the more radical the otherness, the better it is. To a certain level, we don't want the whole storm to disappear. So you need to be careful as well. So do it little by little. Don't force yourself so that the whole system crashes. Because the higher up you get, the more stable the chaotic system becomes. But lower down, they are still weak. And that is a very important feature to know. It is not a good idea to book a ticket to the Himalayas and climb the Mount Everest and think that would work. Neither is a good idea, which is very common these days, to go to South America and try some of these DMT associated substances like ayahuasca. That could actually be the death of you, and this has happened. So do be careful. It's better to have a sort of sturdy donkey-like walk than rush like a galloping full-blood Arab into the great unknown, looking like Lawrence of Arabia on his Arab. No, do the donkey track. And you will find after a while, once you recognize the strange attractor being at work, it is like a being of its own. It has its own force. And I can actually feel that force. It's still very weak. It's almost not perceivable. But somewhere there, dim, shady, almost like smoke that has completely disappeared from a fire, something like that. And that I cannot hold yet. I cannot hold it. I can't force it into existence. But the more substantial it becomes, the more I will be able to force it into existence. I can sort of grab the smoke. But still I'm not there. So I also have to wait for the perfect moment. I can't do it in mid-traffic. I can't do it when there is a big locomotion around me. And this is because the strange attractor is still sort of smoky or dim. Once it gets stronger, you can force it into existence more willingly. And in the end, you can sort of conjure it into existence just by thinking about it. It won't even take any effort. I can imagine you can actually do what we've been ridiculing before, lying down and do hard intellectual work, or meditating, as our good friend said at one instance. It was really funny. Still to this day, I think it's really funny. All persistent system, all strong system in the known universe, doesn't matter what sort of material they're made of, how they are agglomerated, if it's water, if it's tennis balls, if it's oil on the surface of a river, it doesn't matter, they all obey the law of chaos. And chaos is, oddly enough, both what makes possible difference, but it's also sameness, persistence, perseverance. Without chaos, or a low level of chaos, we don't have difference, but neither do we have sameness, understanding, or anything that's durable. Everything outside the chaotic system is not durable. It just disappears out of existence the same moment it is born. One way of thinking about the whole thing is imagining the Milky Way. The Milky Way is ruled by one single strange attractor, although it consists of gazillions of planets, stars, and what you have, black holes. When you look at the Milky Way, it looks almost like a spiral, like a storm spiral, and it looks incredibly organized. It's the largest organized thing you can see with your sheer eye, and it's just amazing. But if you zoom in, what you will see is utterly, utterly different. Everything is different, and the more you zoom in, the more difference you'll get. And that is the fuel of the Milky Way. It is all the differences. If it were absolute sameness, there would not be a Milky Way. And this is one of those things that the universe simply doesn't allow, and that is sameness. This is also a way of understanding that our usual take on scale is a bit sloppy, not very careful. So it could be good to actually put scale into parentheses for a while, epoche, and then a truer scale will come back. But remember the fern, how the fern is repeating itself. So this structure, a part of a leaf of the fern, will repeat the bigger fern and the bigger fern and the bigger fern. This is how the galaxies are working, and this is also the working of all living organisms. And it's called iteration. This is true scale, not absolute scale. And we discussed that many years ago. Some information coming from Julian Barber that there are no absolute scales in the universe. But there is a scale variance when we get to this interesting part in fractality. I could call that true scale, but it's better to use another word, I think. But just there is some sort of scale to reality, but it doesn't work the way we think. But what is true is what is going on the small scale is also going on the big scale. This is from the fern, this is also from the Milky Way. There is not a single part of the Milky Way that's not affected about a single strange attractor. And when you go down to the lower bits, you will see the same effects on the bigger bits, it's just more in the bigger bits. And I think this is like a first tryout in understanding what is scale. What is true scale? And it's a little bit, as we mentioned 2 lectures ago, that we normally think in the normal way of thinking about things in common sense and in ordinary language, that if I want to focus on something really hard, to read the numbers here or something, I need to shut out everything to get into the small. That's a misunderstanding of scale. What happens if I shut everything out? I also lose the smallness. I lose both things in the same way. And this is one of those surprises for most of us. But the reason for us thinking that is that we are already in a lower scale of chaos. And that also makes that the understanding is lower. And that's a very important feature of the chaotic system. It's the only thing in the universe that sort of can read anything off. Because we killed off representationalism, it will never ever happen in human history again. But we need some sort of understanding how things gets read off. How do we actually meet the outer world? Well, we do it by chaos theory of fractality. And that question needs to be addressed in some way. It doesn't matter what area you are in. Doesn't matter if you're talking about the beauty of a wondrous book. It could be a book by Ian Fleming, for instance. And that could be compared to a book by Stephen King. You can see the differences in quality. Ian Fleming is renowned to be very repetitive, not very interesting, but it still makes for a good read if you're not too concentrated. Whereas Stephen King is very demanding. Usually the filmatization of Stephen King novels are great simplifications. He is very exact, but at the same time general in a very interesting way. He's not a bad author at all. He's just a bit wordy sometimes, I think. I think that's will still representation is an important thing. And this broader understanding of fractality will help literary adepts, people going into literature, as well as it will help people who take an interest in building chairs or wanting to know how to travel the roads going to, maybe I heard somebody who wants to travel all the way to Alaska by car. You always have use for that, because representationalism comes in when you read a map. If you have the idea when reading a map that the map is a representation in this scale-wise idea, you will be lost. You will not find your way. That's a known fact from, for instance, the taxi drivers mentioned by Barbara Tversky, that the ones who are very representative and think that the taxi map of London is an exact, whatever that means, exact representation of London, is badly misjudging the thing. And giving up the idea of representation won't help either. What you need to go into is true scale, and that involves you as a taxi driver. You need to change yourself. And this is what the taxi drivers do. Even their brain structure changes after a couple of years. And there is another thing, and that's an aspect of space. And by dividing space into two parts preemptively, existence and non-existence, and say you should start to understand the world from this, so to say, foundation or an a priori idea of things are, almost like Immanuel Kant would have put it, then you will be lost. Modern theories of space do not use existence. They see existence and the opposite of existence as derived from space. And you see, this is a mistake of knowledge level. It is not incorrect to make a distinction between existence and non-existence, but do it at the first level when you meet space is a mistake. And this is something proven by Stephen Wolfram. Of course also in quantum physics. But Stephen Wolfram, still to this day, alive and kicking English physicist, mathematician. It's enough with space, and if it's enough with space, we should only have space. And I would say 99.99% of all literature today starts with the idea that there is already division in the world going on, and that division is between existence and non-existence. No, that comes later in the schedule, and it needs to be motivated. Once more, this is like the 30th time I'm saying that. This is a pointer also to Åge Bohr, the son of Niels Bohr, who frequently said, if you start preemptively with existence, you lose the point. You can't make calculations, you can't understand existence then. And pointed to Heidegger, if we don't start with a why question, no, we don't, I'm just going to stop there. You will neither understand the what question. No questions could be asked after that. It's an a priori take on reality. Of course, this is a heritage from some development early on. Once we understand, we can be open, we start with difference, and then we can have sameness. And this is, in a way, similar but also different to things like finesse, details. Think about the Fernwars more. Details are not opposite to generalities, and this is how I started to think about this wonderful book I will take up today. That's Paul Feyerabend, Conquest of Abundance. Because I would say one of the most important points there is the difference between finite things, small things, discrete things, and generalities. But also about difference and sameness. Scale is also something that should come later. It's a derived feature of the fractality. Still important, but it should come later. It should not be in the world already before you start, because that will block understanding. And the intellect, it's very important to understand, have to obey the laws of chaotic system as well. It's not an exception. There are no exceptions in the universe from chaos, how it works. And an ontic take on the intellect will cripple it, because it would tell the intellect what it can do beforehand. And such a crippled intellect will be dull. It will be passive in its approach to meeting the other, the radical other, the exogenous, or the inner exogenous. Could be our memories, our retention, could also be our pretension, could be how we sort of get closer to our bodies, which also is a sort of exogenous factor, at least in the beginning. And if you go to prematurely, before the fact, start looking for sameness, a little bit like you're still asleep in the morning, you hear the alarm bell, and you immediately start looking for the things around you. It's something I've been guilty of doing for the last 40 years. Where are the things? That's not a good start. You get thing directed, and since the world doesn't consist of things, things are a derived feature. That's still real. That's actually what makes things real. The realness comes from being derived of a bigger generality, which is space. And this also goes hand in hand with a more relaxed looking of the panoramic view. The panoramic view, which is actually the case in most primitive people. Doesn't matter if they're from Namibia, Papua New Guinea, Australia, South America, the Eskimos, they all have a panoramic view. And that view doesn't hurt the eyes. It doesn't make them suffering from myopia and other features. This is something we direct from the inside. And we can only see the result in us being crouched, tensed in our necks, in our tryout to see the objects of the world, the important things of the world. There is certain similarity jumping between the scales and jumping between universals and generalizations, almost to see them as contradictory. This is not exactly how we see it, but it's close enough. But jumping in between universals and particulars is also sort of clumsy. It's not precise enough. They are not opposing pairs. They don't even stand on opposing sides. And one is not derived from the other one. I think that could be the best hint. I think in the old take, we see that smallness sort of is first, and that will lead to bigness. This is the idea of the pre-Socratics. It's not the case. This is not how fractality works. That is making too blunt of a distinction. And too blunt of a distinction will actually block out our possibility of understanding the world and ourselves. We need to be more precise, we need to be more complex, we need to be more fractal. And this is one of the weaknesses of the modern intellectual system. And I think this, in a way, is what Ian McGilchrist is mentioning in his book, The Matter with Things. He seemed to think only in terms of brain spheres, but you can also see, as I'm proposing now, too much of an idea that they are opposing pairs. So the distinctiveness is the Western Hemisphere, according to Ian McGilchrist. The generalities, the universals, are the whole view or the right hemisphere. And I think there is an ingrained idea that these are opposing pairs, and we have to jump in between them. So either we zoom in or we zoom out, but the possibility of doing the same things at the same time, that is out of the possibility. And that, I think, is a big problem. And that problem can be solved by looking into fractality. And I think this is definitely one of the reasons, and this is actually something that Frederick Matthias Alexander pointed out. When people read already in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a group or a percentage that did this over concentration thing. And it has a special look. You're too close to the text, you hunch, and you destroy your eyes in the process. And you often cramp your hand when you do writing and such stuff. You cramp your eyes, you cramp your hand, you cramp your neck. And this, I don't think HDHD was present at that time, but he almost sort of said in a prophetic tune, I think, he called it mind wandering. I think that mind wandering will be more common, and that there actually will exist worse varieties of mind wandering. And HDHD can be actually described as you come to a point of mind wandering that you are no longer aware when you are mind wandering. That's the point of no return. Whereas if in the early 19th century, no, sorry, 20th century, in the early 20th century, the people doing mind wandering were probably habitually doing it, but they were more or less aware of it. And when asked, they could usually force themselves to be present again. Whereas a person who went too far and no longer can recognize when he or she is doing mind wandering is lost somehow. Because that person can't tell, and thereby he cannot sort of project into reality once more to be present. And this is what happens with an HDHD patient. I read one like testimony from one of these people, and he says, I have no idea what's inside myself. I don't know how my thinking is organized. I don't know, and I think this is maybe the most important. I don't know when I have focus or when I don't have focus. And that is as bad as not knowing when you tense a muscle or when you tense it when you go to the gym. That will make it impossible for you to train. And well, even worse, if you don't know when you are contracting a muscle, you can't lift a thing in the end. And this is similar to what's happening in the brain. You can't force yourself to be more focused when you actually need it, because you don't know the muscles of your brain, so to speak. At least you don't know how they work, and you don't know how they're working in your system. And telling that person, giving them an information in the form of a leaflet, this is the working of your mind, of course they can't work either, because they can't focus on the paper, so they can't use it. But hopefully we're not beyond the point of no return. We're still somewhere in between, and I would say I met very few people in my my lecturing career who never did mind wandering. But this Viking guy who attended the lectures in the beginning, Göteborgsgatan, he was actually one of those people. He says he never thinks. And in the beginning I didn't understand what did he mean about this, he never thinks. And then I realized he never mind wanders. He just do things fully concentrated. And that guy had other features that were quite amazing. He could fall asleep within 30 seconds. He can also be awake within 30 seconds. And he also told me he never ever in his life suffered insomnia, which is in itself really weird. It's everyone is doomed to suffer insomnia. So one could say that difference is the father of sameness, or the creator of sameness, because everything gets created by two horizons meeting, two hermeneutical circles or fractalities meeting. So also sameness comes from this meeting, difference as well, and all oppositions and what you have it. This is how it starts. So then you can understand why looking for sameness will be very problematic. And without this force or this energy, because it can actually be felt like an energy in the end, this is actually how they use the term energy in quantum mechanics. We don't have the idea of energy like in classical physics, of a force. Something that I often depicted in my brain as a flash coming from the sky or something. Energy is something very real in quantum mechanics, and it has to do with complexities. And complexities that are working together or being read off, they give what one could call, from a certain perspective, energy. Difference is also the strength to tie things over space, like a galaxy or a storm, but it's also the possibility to tie things over time, to have a perpetual time, something that Susie Froebel showed. Without fractality or a low fractality, every movement is going to be completely new for you, and there will be no connecting thing. It won't be a fractality that can bring your different movements together. So you will sort of experience the world like a goldfish. Every movement is new. And I discussed earlier this goldfish focus on modern man. It's a disaster, and it's particularly bad on posture and body coordination. But it's also bad if we can't concentrate over time. We can't understand our reality, and we can't understand what's happening to us. It is only chaos that can construct permanence over time. Otherwise, we just start over and over and over and over again, and we're not even aware of it. We cannot be aware of it. The only awareness can come from a higher state where you encompass more of time. So if you don't have a greater time, so if you're divided in different nows, and this is absence and this is absence, you can't have these things included. But if you stretch out like a chaotic system and include those things, you can have a sort of awareness over time. You can remember also, and you can start to project all those things that Ben Ariely showed doesn't exist today. We don't plan, we don't do pretension, we don't do retention. Very few people are aware of the past. And just looking around Gothenburg, a lot of things has happened the last 20, 30 years. We used to have very, very old cafes and restaurants. All of those are gone now. And if you ask people, no one is aware of it. There's no longer any Bräutigams, there's no Weisse, there is no Tyrolean Corner, all those things are gone. Things that lasted for 100 years. So this is escalating, which is in itself not a bad thing, I would say. It needs to escalate if we are going to return to the ordered system of chaos. Otherwise we won't ever do it. And that's built into the whole system. So you can possibly speculate that things goes up and down, and maybe a little bit like in the Hegelian fashion. You have thesis and then you have antithesis and synthesis. But I wouldn't say it works that way. I don't think that Hegel had a point there. But there is coming in a going of things, that maybe like a wave, I don't know how. But I don't think it's that simple as Hegel proposed. And obviously, this lack of an overview make us construct something of a dummy or a proxy. And this is, of course, the origo, or the world from nowhere, or the world at large. We imagine this powerful panopticon, and that we have access to him or her somehow. And this is pure fantasy, this is just illusion. And this is even snuck up in Newtonian classical physics. But I would say it's a big feature of everyone today. They feel that something is watching them, taking care of them, and this is the idea of the panopticon. And whatever that is in reality is nothing in reality. It's not a possibility. You need to stretch out differences to have awareness. Otherwise, you will be a point-like awareness, and you will not even be aware of it. And this is the same rather dreadful thing that happens to a person suffering from ADHD. Most likely that person is only momentaneously aware of his affliction, and then the next moment is gone. So even the possibility of reflecting and knowing something over time is lost. And this is what sort of made me delusion before it made me hopeful. I remember how once upon a time I was studying linguistics, and they said to me, we already changed 3 times, so you can expecting if you're going to study the whole 4 terms, that something's going to change during those 4 terms, which it did. And that was not something I liked. They thought it was interesting. It would be boring if it doesn't change. Well, something has to be the same, otherwise it's not knowledge, I was thinking to myself. I became a little bit disillusioned. I think that disillusion is gone now, because there is no reason to be disillusioned, because the whole universe is working according to this principle, bar nothing. Even if you have the illusion it doesn't work that way, it doesn't matter. You're still a chaotic system, although on a lower level, but still, chaos rules, and order, oddly enough, comes back into the scheme. And I think it's odd in these times that Chalmers put up, I think it was just merely 20 or 30 years ago, must have been 30 years ago, the hard problem, the problem of consciousness. Although whenever you read anything from Chalmers, he seemed to be lacking that feature himself.
Who?
Chalmers.
Chalmers.
So he doesn't seem to have it himself, and still he's having this constructed the whole problem with the hard problem, and at least 50-60 book has been written about the hard problem, and it's a recurring problem within a lot of discussions within the science of consciousness, and also in this big event every year in Arizona, in Tucson, where they discuss consciousness. Chalmers is one of those protruding people of modern time who was allowed to sort of construct this problem. But when you read him, he doesn't have any idea of consciousness. I think he has this lack, this permanence, and he is hoping for consciousness somewhere. And therefore he constructed this very, very cumbersome idea of something that no one felt, and it sort of emerges somewhere, and people sort of cling to this for their bare life. Where is it? Where is this consciousness? Of course you do. If you don't have consciousness, of course you're going to cling to it. Consciousness is an effect of diversity, difference. And if there is no difference, you simply don't have it. It's a higher level, and being too stuck on one level and thinking that everything goes on the same level, that really, that real stance is a stance you do take. And that will block out the idea that you can have multiple levels going on the same time, which is actually how language works, according to Wittgenstein, but also according to Lakoff-Johnson. Language wouldn't work if it wasn't multi-level. And you have different meanings going on at the same time. This is what makes the fractal complexity of words, so they could mean something. And I think that was excellently deconstructed by Derrida in his book about the science, and also in Dissemination, I would say. So it's a very, very narrow point of view to think of reality as being on one level, and it's just in one now, and it's just in one place, here, now, one level. And I made a little tale about this one level, and I call it the tale about the ant house. And in this ant house there is gazillion of ants, and lower down there is a particular ant. We could call this particular ant Professor Antwood. It's very fitting because he's an ant and he lives in the woods, so I would call him Antwood. Let us imagine that he's rather big ant. Maybe he's one of those fearsome termites, I don't know. And he can bite things around him, and he sort of gather other ants, and he's starting to proclaiming things to these ants. And what he proclaims is that there is only here and now, and there are no higher levels. Let's see, this is our perspective we are looking at. This is the ant house, and he's living down here somewhere. And he says, down here, there is only this level. There are no more level. And there is no superstructure to the whole ant farm or the ant house. And as well, there is no purpose of the ant farm or the ant house. So there is nothing, he says, down here on his level of a project, pretension. The ant, the collection of ant doesn't have a future. So he takes away the idea of there coming new ant queens, starting new ant houses, ant places everywhere, flying, mating. All those things are rejected because it's only now. And the bigger structure doesn't simply exist. It's blocked out, and he teaches the other ants, and he actually gets in contact with a revered idol of him, and we can call him Anthony Chomsky. He's actually a linguist. And this Anthony Chomsky says that everything can be reduced to sameness in every aspect of reality. This is actually what Noam Chomsky says. He says that all of language could be encompassed in only one line. So all languages are derived from this line. And last time I saw it 20 years ago, it looks like this. A bit longer, maybe there is 24 letters or 40, but it's just one line. All of language could be reduced to that. So this Anthony Chomsky is actually proposing sameness as well. This is another feature. So everything is not just on one level, everything is just in the now, because this Antwood, he has no idea that it could be a future of the beehive, or what is called ant farm, ant house. There could be no future, and there is no past. It was never a structure of the ant hill. Those two things are out of the question. But it gets strengthened now with Anthony Chomsky, because he says everything is same as well. So even thinking about this is now excluded. So you can't even see that you propose that. So then you really come to just a point here. And that point is similar to itself. It's self-similarity. It's identical to itself. So there can only be momentary understanding, as I actually heard so many times from professors living, some of them past also. And there can only be momentary understanding and perpetual forgetfulness. It's a bit like Sisyphus, but immensely worse. Much worse than Sisyphus. Because at least Sisyphus could remember he'd done it before. But here you don't even have remembrance. You have a destiny worse than death, actually. And how does one teach this? Well, of course, if you're Anthony Chomsky or this Dr. Antwood, you can only teach this by aggressiveness. You can put fear into people, and this is what he's doing with his tusks, attacking other ones. And they just have to repeat what he's saying. That is knowledge on this level. Repetition, or renaming, as we already called it. So it's a problematic thing, especially this thing with the Anthony Chomsky. And that is an assumption that sort of underlies everything. And this is the assumption that brings Paul Feyerabend into the scheme. And I didn't fully realize this until today. There is an underlying stream of thinking here. Under those things I mentioned before, there is an underlying current here. And I would say I haven't realized this until now, to its full extent. And this is from the book by Paul Feyerabend, The Conquest of Abundance. And here we have, this is paying honor to the old master. I thought I learned it all. What he is pointing to here is, he puts it in writing, but it's still very hard to understand, and it takes some long time. And it's some assumption which I thought was just in science, and that is that we know everything, or there is a possibility to know everything about the world. And what Paul Feyerabend is saying is not that it would be hard to know the whole world, or maybe that day never comes when we know the whole world, because it's too much work or too much complications. No, he's not saying neither of those two things. He's not saying it could be done He doesn't say it's a thing of the future, or it's too complex. So it is hypothetically I can't pronounce that. Possible, but will never happen. This I understand already when I read the book, but it's not the thing is not that we will be able to map reality more and more exact. And it's not neither the case, it's too complex, so that would be too much work to map the world more and more. Both of those two things is wrong, according to Paul Feyerabend. And they are not only wrong in the world, they are wrong by principle. And what he means is the very idea these two things are having together, it's this mapping idea, and that is in itself the problem why something went wrong in the late Roman Empire, and that continued to be the case, and that worsened more and more. And it is the very idea that knowledge could be constructed that way, by mapping out a territory that we say from the beginning is unknown somehow. That is the problem. The division, saying we know this, this we don't know. This is the problem. This is not something we could know from the beginning. We can't know what we don't know. We can't even know that there is something to know. None of those things are actually sound. So there is a tendency that stop knowledge, and this is one of the worst things you can ever do. And this is Professor Antwoord, he doesn't do this. This is what Anthony Chomsky does. So he makes things an incredible amount much worse, because Professor Antwoord can only cause minimal harm to his level. But what Anthony Chomsky could do, he can make the whole anthill to dissolve, to its destruction. This is the point of Paul Feyerabend. And this is also why science has gone down. We mentioned that many times, that scientific progress is going down by the minute almost. The late 40s, we were absolutely convinced that we will solve the riddle of cancer, we will know how to avoid cardiac arrest and so forth. Nothing of that has happened. We still don't know. So it's going down. And the reason it's going down is that we have this idea of that the world could be known, and that there is a part we don't know, and that there is a part that we know. This we can absolutely not know. It's absolutely ridiculous to say that. We don't know what we know. How could we know that? Well, that once more, of course, assumes a perspective from nowhere, but it's not mentioned in the book of Thomas Nagel, because this is a tougher question. So he missed out on this. And this is the very point of Paul Feyerabend. And now I realize this. It's an incredibly interesting point. But to my defense, well, it is very tough to understand. And I don't know if he did the best job to transferring this. Well, not to me anyway, because it's too many real examples, like this one. This real example of the conquest of abundance set me on the wrong path. I thought it was something you can actually see. He doesn't mean it that way. It's just a pointer somewhere. And to say that it actually started in the late Roman Empire, it's also a pointer. It should not be taken literally, because it's not a trend. It's underlying all thinking. And this could be actually something that is all over the world. It's not mistake that is typically connected to the metaphysics of presence. This is a thinking mistake, and it could always turn up when you reach a certain level of thinking. Once you know enough of the world, you will assume that you know which part you know, and you know that there's a rest of the part that you don't know. There is a very good example, actually. This is a real example. Now I understood this. This is a live example. I've been thinking about it. Take the map of Africa. We know the surroundings already by 1840, but we didn't know the inside of Africa. It was not mapped. It was black. Livingstone and Stanley went in there. And they were the first two people to sort of shake hands in the middle of Africa. This is different. This is not what we do with science. This is looking from outside. We can look from outside here to a certain degree. We can circumvent the whole coast of Africa, and then we can know what's inside is unknown. This is not the case with something we don't know anything about. How could it be the case? How can we say what we know and we don't know about knowledge? That's absolutely impossible. That would take that we have a sort of outside view, that we looked at our own knowledge from a point of view that doesn't exist. And you see now why the perspective of Anthony Chomsky is different from Professor Antwoord. Antwoord is not doing harm to anyone else, hardly even himself. He's stuck where he is because of his own makeup, how he's made. But when it comes to Anthony Chomsky, he's perpetuating a grand mistake. And that mistake is really hard to discover. And the reason I didn't understand it that time, I wasn't ready for it, but it's also extremely hard to understand. It's extremely hard to understand how that could even be a problem. But it is a massive problem. And it puts incredible limits on what you will learn after you accepted that. This is almost the closest you can get to a death pill for knowledge. Once you sort of eaten that pill, it's a piece of arsenic, you won't develop anymore, because for some mad reason you know what you know, and you know that there are things you don't know. And how on earth you can know those things, you can never answer. Because this is one more of those questions that can never ever be answered by anyone. Because the question is completely wrong posed. It's a failure to understand something. But don't be alarmed. We're all sitting in the same boat when it comes to this mistake. I would say there are very few people in the living world who understood it to the extent that Paul Feyerabend could explain it. Helpfully good anyway. And I think that was also the understanding of Wittgenstein. But understanding that from the book of Wittgenstein, good luck with that. That won't happen. Although it is there. So it is a thank to the book once more. I haven't, was 3 years I read it. You can still see the coffee marks that I put on this book when I read 3 or 4 years ago, I think. And I read it really carefully. I copied half of the book, I translated it into Swedish to be sure I really understood it. I still had good use of it. It was a very good thing to do that, and I have no idea why I choose this book, because this is the only book of his where he really points to this specific feature. In his other books, he is mainly pointing to the problem within science. Here he is pointing to the real problem that undermines or underlines the problem in science. I'm extremely happy I reached that point. I would just have to work on the explanation for this, because this is a trigger. This is really a trigger. Could be one of the most toughest things to understand. Well, sameness is a helper here. Sameness and difference is a helper. It sort of loosen the whole idea of a fixed understanding up. And in the end, you will notice it's a liberation to understand. You can never ever be sure of what you know in that way, because that is a perpetual problematic thing for you. It will not help you in any way. It will actually be a sort of a hindrance in either way. And once you understand you have a unique perspective, you can actually use that perspective to your advantage. So there is no loss in this, absolutely none. You don't lose out on any knowledge. There is just 100% gain. So thank you very much, Paul Feyerabend. I wish I'd known you personally. And I say thank you very much for you listening, and good afternoon.
Thank you.